Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, streets were filled with carnival celebrations during the last few weeks, although there were some serious dangers along the way. We'll look tonight at the renewed debate over carnival safety. In Baton Rouge, Governor John Bel Edwards made sea level rise part of his second-term concerns, while nearby the Mississippi River continues its annual climb. We'll be discussing these stories, plus transit proposals and scheduling concerns for downtown, and a look at this port city's vulnerability to the coronavirus are on the schedule for tonight's Informed Sources. And joining us are Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Mark Schlefstein, environmental reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, and Jessica Williams, also a reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to go over to Mark first. And everybody's thinking these days coronavirus. And of course, as Errol wrote in the lead, we're a major port city. Just how vulnerable are we?
We're vulnerable for several reasons. One is because of the port city issue, which is sort of a problem. The fact that we have cruise ships coming in and out could be a possible problem, especially now that we have seen a couple of cases in South America. More, though, is just the fact that we're a tourist spot and that we capture people who are coming from everywhere, largely by air, and air is the real problem, is airlines bringing, the potential for airlines bringing people who have gotten the virus somewhere. At the moment, the information that we have is still, it's still fairly sketchy in terms of the United States. We've got 60 known U.S. cases, including 42 that were passengers on that cruise ship, the Emerald Princess, that docked in Japan, who have come back to the United States. 3 expatriates from Wuhan, China, who finally made it back into the United States. And most of the other cases that we know about were somehow related to someone in China. And then there's this one case in Northern California that seems to be coming from nowhere. Nobody really knows where it's coming from, but it might be from an Air Force base nearby, something like that.
Because the infected passengers from that cruise liner that had been quarantined in Japan, some of them
came back into the United States through there and were quarantined in the United States there.
And close to there, where that woman who was diagnosed lived.
Right. So,
but most of our cruises just go like to Mexico and to the
Mexico and
South America
and all those other places. But the problem is that those places are going to be at danger of getting passengers from other countries coming in there, not just from New Orleans, and then spreading it. And that's what the real problem is. The Journal for the American Medical Association had an article that came out today that really described what things look like worldwide. And as of Thursday, there have been more than 82,000 cases of, they call it COVID-19, this particular strain of the coronavirus worldwide, including 2,800 deaths. And the vast majority of those cases, both the cases themselves and the deaths, were in China. But the problem is the cases have now been reported in 49 other countries. This virus may very well have been caused by the spread from an animal. They think it's a chrysanthemum bat that spread it in China. While the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization have been promoting the idea of a 1 to 14 day incubation period for this virus, and have been setting, getting people quarantined for that long period of time, it may very well be that they're going to have to expand that to 24 days based on additional information that's coming out. And the virus is basically spread by droplets from sneezes and coughing. But it's also been found in blood and in stools. So that's another concern, is that there may be ways that this is spread that we're still not sure about. In general, what the doctors have been seeing is fever in the vast majority of the cases, a dry cough, fatigue or muscle pain in about 11 to 44% of the cases, and other symptoms include headache, sore throat, abdominal pain, diarrhea. All of these things are very similar to what you might see with the flu.
Right.
But of course, the problem is that deaths from the flu are a very small percentage, 0.1%, and so far the numbers for cases ending up in death for this virus have been about 2%. So
And
that's
so
a real concern.
how do we protect ourselves?
Well, at the moment, the best way to protect yourself is to cover up. Make sure that, you know, if you're coughing or something else, that you're coughing into something. If
Wash
you're
your
sick,
hands.
wash your hands all the
All the
time.
time, yeah.
If
Who's
you're
the
sick,
most
don't go
susceptible
to
to the
work.
virus?
That's go to a doctor first.
Who's the most susceptible to the virus? Is
Well,
it children,
that's another
or-
thing that's still unclear based on what we're seeing. And one of the problems that we're seeing is that a number of the cases in China have been the medical workers who are fairly young who have come down with this disease because they've been in areas where they might be exposed over and over again. But again, that's because they've been in that kind of an exposure environment. But largely, the ones who are most at risk are people 50 and over who have the biggest chance of this being a problem. In most cases, though, the virus is not, you know, it's not a bad disease normally, except when it does get bad, and that's the concern. The concern is that we may see enough cases for this to be declared a pandemic in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, so, but nothing here, really, in our immediate area
Nothing
we
has
know
been
of.
found in our
Right.
immediate area.
Okay, well, I hope it stays that way.
I
All
hope
right,
that I hope
thanks.
it does too.
Thank you, Mark. All right, Jessica, over to you. An idea that's sort of percolating is something called a bus hub, which Errol really loves the term of, for
Bus
Orleans
hub.
Parish. So tell us, what is a bus hub and where will it be?
So for years, buses have gone, a majority of buses in the city have gone through the central business district. That's where the jobs are. A lot of folks in the tourism industry and in working in high rises downtown are using the buses to get to that point. But there hasn't been any shelter or lighting for folks who have to get off of one bus and transfer to another bus. A bus hub would essentially provide that shelter, provide seating, provide lighting, provide a dedicated place for buses to park. Something similar to what's going on at Duncan Plaza, except a lot more organized and a lot more intentional. And the agency has actually tried to do this, the public transit agency in the city, for years, but it was never able to get the funding. We do have streetcar amenities like this. We have shelter, we have benches along the Canal Street streetcar line, but no such similar thing for buses. Now, the 4 locations that they're looking at building this, if they get a grant that's actually due, they have to apply for this and hear back later this year. The 4 locations that they're looking to do this would be the Basin Street Nutri-Ground between Canal and Conti Streets. Another along the Basin Street Nutri-Ground, but between Canal and Iberville in one direction, and then between South Rampart and Canal and Common in the other direction. They're also looking at Duncan Plaza, sort of where the buses were rerouted after the Hard Rock collapse. But they would put it not where they're going now, which is over on Loyola, but on the other side of Duncan Plaza, and build that shelter, build that seating and those amenities there, and have buses go through there. And the final location that they're examining is on Canal and Common Streets. And they really want to hear from people, to see riders, to see which would be the best and most convenient location for them. The city's public transit advocacy group has already come out and said that it would actually prefer a Basin Street location, just because you have that connectivity with the Canal Street streetcar line.
Right.
And a lot of riders are riding the streetcars and transferring over to buses, and it might be better to have something that's just right on that same area where the buses used to go before the Hard Rock, that's more centrally located, as opposed to having it out at Duncan Plaza, which is kind of out of the way for folks. They have to walk a little bit to get where they're trying to go.
And if ever they locate City Hall and the auditorium, which the mayor wants, that'd be nice and convenient.
There you go. There you go. We'll see if that happens, though.
And so would this sort of look like what has been built at Canal and City Park? Are you
Similar
familiar
to
with
that. Similar
But
to
on
that.
maybe on a larger scale? or
But on a
something?
larger scale, exactly. So if you remember, and you remember a couple years ago, they actually built shelter and benches so that you could connect with the RTA and the JET
Right.
bus lines. It would be similar to that, but on a broader scale. There would actually be more places for buses to park and kind of like on that angle to let riders board. Right now, over at Canal, at the spot where you just mentioned, buses can kind of go into that little turnabout. But this would be a place where multiple buses could park and set up to where riders could just walk right on. It would be more convenient, and they're hoping to get this money. It's about $4 million that they're looking at. They're hoping that it happens. Bigger pool of money that's coming out of several cities and states that are applying for this from the Federal Transit Administration.
But you're talking about the canal in City Park Place. I pass by there often, and there's a lot of seating there, but I never see anybody sitting there. It doesn't seem to have much use.
Well, I think it depends on what time you go, and then also that space is used a lot by folks that are looking to transfer, folks that are looking to get to Delgado. This is really the central point for a majority of the bus lines in the city that have the heaviest use of ridership. And it's just been years that this has been the case, but there's been no seating available for folks that are looking to sit down. If you pass around there now at Duncan Plaza, you see plenty of folks standing up, kind of leaning on the side of the not benches, but the curve that separates the park from the sidewalk, but there's no place for them to sit and there's no lighting for them.
So when could this become a reality if they get the money to
So
do
the
it?
application is due by March 30th, and they're hoping to hear back from the feds by summer of this year, and then hopefully, if they win, would get it later on and then start construction and be finished in about another year or two. So maybe like an 18 to 24-month process at most.
All righty, Jessica, thanks a lot. Errol, over to you. Carnival season over with. It's one that carried with it a lot of celebration, but also a lot of sorrow. And so folks are meeting. They met yesterday to see what can be done to make Carnival safer.
Yeah. But first, I want to show a picture from the New York Times. This is from Monday's New York Times. We faced a carnival where government had to act, and twice they just canceled a parade right in mid-parade. Another night, because of the weather, it postponed all three parades. So we really see government acting on parades, but nothing as dramatic as what happened in Venice. This was the New York Times Monday, but where because of the virus, they canceled Carnival entirely, the Carnival in Venice. And so you see one masker out at St. Mark's Square, and in the background you see a little float. It reminds me of the police strike. Those were here in '79, okay, when Carnival was canceled here, and a few people went out in masquerade. But I think this is very touching in terms of the impact and what's going on. This carnival, yeah, in many ways it was a wonderful carnival, and in the long run the weather held up to many good things, but the fatalities are going to overshadow everything. And so just a few comments about that. One thing is that one of the first demands that came out from one of the crews is that we need to establish some sort of a committee or a task force to deal with this. There has been a committee or task force since the 1980s under Dutch Morial. There was a Mardi Gras where there were several incidents along the lines of this, and the Mardi Gras Coordinating Committee was established with the mission of dealing with safety issues. And from that came recommendations about safety harnesses and requiring riders to throw throws further out rather than close. And so there's been a committee dealing with that. Now, over the years, there's been a lot of turnover both in City Hall and on the committee, and perhaps some people have lost track of what that committee was doing. And the committee itself, being that it was the only closest thing there was to a government body that looked at Mardi Gras, was given a lot of other tasks also, such as like if there's a parade renewal, it goes to them. But the apparatus has been there, and it consists, in most recent years, the chairman was Sonny Borey, who was the captain of Orpheus. Most recently, the mayor appointed the captain of Rex and the president of Zulu to be co-chair. This is before all this happened. So that thing is there, and the people who are members of this tend to be a lot of carnival captains, who I suspect would be pretty much the same people there. So I don't know if they want to get the existing structure and just say, okay, go and do it, or let's start something, a substructure, but it's been there. Now, in terms of the possible solutions about tandems, is that, and first of all, as far as we know, these were just like accidents. It was just like things that just shouldn't have happened. But the some of the ideas that people are talking about, one is like having guards walk alongside each of the floats. Another is having something like what the tandem buses have, which is an accordion kind of screen device.
And these are the multi-part floats we're talking about.
Yeah. These are the ones with and so in that area between. That's where the problem is when people go between those floats trying to get beads or something, or in one case trying to cross over. And of course, the driver, who may be 2 floats up,
Right.
has no idea what's going on. And so those couple of ideas. Another idea is having just nothing but barricades all along the street. I did talk to one parade organizer, and while he sees those as all solutions, he sees fault too. He says that the screens that have been done before a few years ago, and the problem is that parades at some points take really sharp turns, and the screens really couldn't survive all of those turns. As far as the guards alongside, he said one time they had like I think it was the junior ROTC, and it didn't take long before the kids were bailing out, saying, "Man, there's too much pressure here." I would argue you don't use the junior ROTC, you use the Marines or the Navy SEALs to be doing that. But I would think that the barricades, it's a lot of work,
Right.
to do that. And the real concern, something really major almost happened this Mardi Gras, in that the city really, really made a heavy push for Endymion to move uptown. They had a big contentious meeting, and the reason is because of that, because all the protections are already in place downtown with the barricades and all that. The Endymion people fought it, and as somebody who lives in Mid-City, I could say that Endymion is a very important urban celebration in those areas, and the people uptown don't want it either. But those are some of the issues they're going to have to be looking
Yeah,
at.
a lot of issues, that are going to be dealt with, including ladders, tents, et cetera. Like Police Chief Ferguson said, everything's on the table. So we'll see what happens. Okay, Abe, thanks a lot. Mark, over to you. Governor Edwards, John Bell Edwards, in the second term, really said the coast is really going to be a concern, and environment going to be a concern. So he's laid out some ideas.
He has indeed. He had a press conference last week, and the positive part of it. There were numerous positive parts of it, but the key thing is that he's looking at the coastal restoration and coastal protection programs of the state as being major benefits to the state, not just in terms of what they can do in terms of protecting the community and rebuilding the coast, but in terms of financial improvements. We're talking about $1 billion worth of new projects this year. 2020, fiscal year 2020, $1 billion. And a good indication that we are going to see billion-dollar years continue for probably at least 10 or 15 years, largely because of the fact that the money from the BP oil spill is finally pouring in, but also because we've gotten money from other sources, including from the offshore oil revenue. One of the things that he announced today, last week, was that the state expects to get a significant amount, $120 million this year from offshore oil revenue in the Gulf of Mexico. So those kinds of things are really good. And the state is looking at ways through the Louisiana Department of Economic Development and through the Department of Natural Resources and the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority of making the best of that, getting jobs out there, training programs for people to train them to get the jobs that are going to be created.
So the jobs
by
we're
this.
talking about, is this the land building, creating
Right.
diversions, reducing carbon emissions?
Exactly.
all of the
Well,
above?
that, and then there's the second part of his announcement, which was, I think, the thing that was the most unusual about his announcement, which was that he wants the state to seriously look at how to reduce carbon emissions from largely from the petrochemical industry and the oil and gas industry. And the first step that he's going to do is basically tally up exactly what that means. The idea behind this, he said, was that Louisiana is a key producer of carbon and carbon-related materials that are causing climate change, causing global warming, and global warming is causing sea level rise. And while sea level rise has only a small percentage of the amount of only a small percentage of that sea level rise is a result of carbon emissions right now. Over the next century, it's going to get bigger and bigger and really dwarf the subsidence and erosion issues along the coast. So he's looking at ways of doing that. He made clear that his initial plan is not to go out and say we're going to put new regulations on the petrochemical industry to reduce your emissions. What he's trying to do is get them to come to the table and say, hey guys, how can we start looking at ways to reduce your emissions in ways that make sense?
Which, of course, we're hearing, particularly in spots or PSAs or whatever, the oil industry saying we're working to do that. So
Right.
we'll see if they're going to be willing to come to the table.
And indeed, the Louisiana, one of the Louisiana oil and gas groups put out a press release saying that they support this effort and its first steps.
Could be a very positive step.
It
then.
could be.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mark. Back over to you, Jessica. And TransDev, that's the company that operates transit for RTA in Orleans, but they're not meeting the schedules.
They're not. The RTA recently signed a new deal with TransDev that extends their services for another 3 years, but also it agreed to hold the firm to a higher standard of performance, and it agreed to curb some of its responsibility. The RTA recently hired a team of public managers to look at TransDev's performance, and the buses were only running, according to this team, about 75% of the time. And so they worked into the contract that they signed in September a 90% goal that the firm would have to meet within the first 6 months. Well, we're right at the 6-month mark, and TransDev has not met the goal. In some cases, buses have only run half of the time on time.
On schedule, yeah.
And streetcars have run even less than that. And of course, you know, we did have the situation in October with the Hard Rock collapsing that required TransDev to switch its routes to avoid the site. But that structure has been in place now for about 4 or 5 months since October. And just the latest numbers that came out in January showed that we're still with only half of our buses running on time, and only 25% or 23%, excuse me, of our streetcars running on time. And so the RTA is really looking at this information as an opportunity to hold TransDev accountable. It's actually forced the firm to come up with an action plan to remedy it, but also built within its contract is a provision that allows the RTA to penalize TransDev, because TransDev gets some money for operating these streetcars and buses, and the RTA would essentially take back some of that money if it continues to not adhere to the performance standard. The RTA has also put TransDev under a temporary transition period or probation period that essentially says that if the RTA is not satisfied with TransDev's performance from now until May or its improvement, it can terminate the contract altogether. And so it's interesting because the RTA has explored several different governance models in recent years. It's thought about what it would mean to go to a fully public system where you would have all public employees and no private contractor running the day-to-day operation, what it would mean to go to a hybrid system, which is what they're doing now, and of course what they had before, which was when TransDev ran every part of its operation and answered only to the volunteer board of directors.
And TransDev has been associated with the public transit here for quite a while, under a different name at first.
Veolia Transportation.
Yeah, Veolia,
it came on the scene in 2009, taking over then from a public team, and really positioned itself as the entity that could help the city recover, the city's transit system recover after Katrina. And so moving forward, it remains to be seen whether TransDev has worn out its welcome in New Orleans, and if the RTA should move in the direction of getting a new operator, or should move in the direction of taking some control over its own shop.
And operating itself.
France-based?
What's that?
Isn't it France?
It is. It's a French conglomerate. It has offices all around the globe, but it is also in some trouble with other agencies in the U.S. It's got a lawsuit against Baltimore right now, or Baltimore has a lawsuit against it for service-related concerns, and it has sort of pulled out from some of the other agencies that it's dealing with.
Okay. All right. We'll be looking for that. Thanks a lot, Jessica. Mark, we'll have you wrap up. The river, Mississippi River, is it rising much?
It is rising, and we're going to see it get to 16.9 feet, which is a tiny bit below the 17-foot official flood level. But that official flood level really is not an accurate portrayal of our risk in New Orleans. In New Orleans, we're protected to between 23 and 25 feet by both levees and recent increases in heights of flood walls. But the good part about this is that we're not expecting this high river to last for very long. It'll be at 16.9 next Wednesday. It'll stay that way for 4 days and then start dropping off. There's a bunch of rain that's going to occur in the Ohio River Basin beginning next Wednesday at the same time, but it'll take at least a month to get down here, and by that time the river should be low enough that it shouldn't be a significant problem.
Now, this is something that happens every
Yeah.
year, that the water comes down the Mississippi River to us.
Right, but not necessarily this high. This is yet another of the last 4 or 5 years we've seen very high rivers occurring that have increased the amount of fresh water getting into our wetlands and causing problems for fishers as well, which will be something we're going to have to be looking at over the next couple of
Wasn't the
months.
snowfall mild this year?
Oh, no. No, actually it wasn't, and indeed last week there was another significant layer of snow added up to the north.
There's still more coming down our way.
Yeah, there's still more coming
I
down.
meant New Orleans wasn't the snowfall.
Well, in New Orleans, yes, we had a very light,
very mild.
Almost
But last year
non-existent.
at this time,
Yes.
the river was really high, and we had to open the spillway.
Right.
The
This
first
year
time
we're
in
not
the
going
early
to have
part
to
of the
open
year.
the spillway, and that's because it's only expected to get to that 16.9 level. It won't go above that, and the trigger really is about 17 feet and expected to continue to rise. So no reason to do that.
So right now, no thought about opening spillway,
No-
but we
no-
still have to
no
see what
spillway
happens up
opening.
north. That's what
Right.
really tells the tale.
Right.
Okay, and then heavy rainfall here too, I guess. Does it impact
Yeah,
a
but
bit?
that doesn't impact
that
the
doesn't-
river.
Okay.
Yeah, it goes
All right.
into the lake.
All righty. Thanks a lot, Mark. Okay, I think it is now time to look ahead.
It is. We're getting some new nonstop international air service. There's going to be an announcement Monday at the airport by Spirit Airlines. They won't say where it's going, but looking at the guest list, there are a lot of people who speak Spanish who are attending that. So it kind of seems to me it might be Central American service.
Okay, Mark.
So legislature's about to start, and we're already seeing bills dropping into the hopper, and one of the ones is by Senator Patrick Connick from Marrero, and he's going to be attempting to get a refiguring of the way that money is distributed among the levy districts within the two East Bank and West Bank levy authorities, to allow the levy authorities to use money from one district when it in another district's area, when that actually helps both districts to improve their protection.
So this is going to be considered?
It's going to be considered.
Thanks a lot. Jessica?
Some customers may see a very small decrease on their bills this April for Energy New Orleans. The City Council recently came to an agreement with Energy to allow the rates that it set back last year to hold while Energy continues to fight those rates in court.
All righty, we'll look for that. And thank you guys for being here. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.